ladies and gentlemen, and good morning in Toronto. I trust I find you all safe and well in these continued extraordinary times. With the cancellation of the Toronto conference due to the global pandemic, the BCO has salvaged the best parts of the conference agenda and put together a trilogy of webinars under the title, The Office Reimagined. 2 weeks ago, we heard from the Canadian developers and disruptors. And last week, we heard from the Canadian occupiers in a webinar moderated by Chris Testy of TP Bennett Architects. Today, I'm delighted to say that we're able to hear from a mix of experts from both sides of the Atlantic and what they have to say in this webinar titled, The Office, the City, Taking or Giving a Sense of Place. Before I introduce you to your moderator and speakers, I'd personally like to thank the Toronto Gold and Silver sponsors on behalf of the BCO for so generously supporting my program and sponsoring this webinar series. The gold sponsors are BDP Quadrangle, Gleeds, Lutron, Skanska, Troop Bywater and Anders, Hare and WSP. And the silver sponsors are Darling Associates Architects, Hawley, HDR Hurley Palmer Flat, Overbury, UNI and Wembley Park. Their unequivocal support during these testing times has been truly remarkable, and we at the BCO remain extremely grateful. It is with their support that the BCO can continue with its great work, delivering best-in-class office specifications and requirements for offices both now and in the future. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the plenary panel to you. The irrepressible Paul Finch, Program Director for the World Architecture Festival and Editor-Director of the Architectural Review and Architects Journal. He has kindly offered to moderate our esteemed panel of speakers for this third webinar in this series. Joining Paul are Claire Hopkinson, Director and CEO of the Toronto Arts Council, Alistair Moss, Co-Head of Real Estate Memory Crystal, LLP, and Chairman of the Property Investment Board and Deputy Chairman of the Planning and City of London, Deputy Chairman of Planning at the City of London, and Roger Madlin, Joint Head of the 53-acre Canada Water Development for British Land in South London. Previous to this, Roger was CEO of Argent and secured and led major projects in Manchester, Birmingham, the Thames Valley, and the 56-acre King's Cross development in North London. Paul, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to have you with us. I'd like to now hand over to Paul to moderate this exciting session, which will hopefully lead to some provocative questions at the end during the Q&A session. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Robin, and welcome to this session. And I suppose it was really inspired by the thought that in the changed circumstances resulting from pandemic, much attention has been given to the interior of our future offices because of necessary arrangements that have been made in terms of distancing, the effect that has on bench layouts, questions about ventilation, so on and so forth. But of course, the external impact of office buildings and mixed use developments with a significant office component is equally, if not more important. After all, it's the exterior world which most people experience, other than the people who actually work in an office building itself. So what is it that commercial buildings of every scale, what is it that they can give to the city? Can they give more than they take? It's a subject which can be addressed from numerous points of view, architectural, sociological, economic. There's a lot of potential territory to cover. So I'm delighted to ask Claire Hopkinson, CEO of Toronto Arts Council, to kick us off with some perspectives of somebody who obviously in normal times works in an office, but whose life revolves really around the extraordinary life in that extraordinary city. Claire.
Thank you very much, Paul, for your warm welcome. And if I could have the first slide up, please. So I'm really honored to be on this panel, so thank you for inviting me. And of course, I'm totally sorry that I don't get to welcome you all personally to Toronto. Hopefully one day you'll be able to come to our fair city and explore our incredible art scene. So I'm just going to start off by telling you a little bit about myself. So prior to joining the Toronto Arts Council and the Foundation, I've worked for many years as a theatre producer. It was an adventure to produce shows in the most unlikely of spaces: historic brewery warehouses, sawmills, and even the grounds and bowels of our local science center for an all-night opera. I have welcomed audiences to spaces across Toronto, from the tiniest of ateliers to the grandest of stages. Next slide, please. Indeed, next slide. Indeed, thank you. I was proud to be part of the team that brought the beloved Elgin and Winter Garden Theatre back to life, one of the few surviving double-decker theatres in the world. It was a transformative moment for Toronto's Main Street, Yonge Street, in 1989. So I trust that we all share a common ground, our mutual desire to find new ways to animate and enliven spaces. Next slide, please. After moving to Toronto in 1980, I became enamored with the creative potential of the city. New ideas were welcome. Toronto is dynamic. It is incredibly diverse, as you know, and relatively speaking, quite new compared to the cities of Europe. Toronto was, for 1,500 years, the carrying place or meeting place for many Indigenous nations, and we are now quite literally the meeting place for many cultures who make their home here and actually cohabit very peacefully. Our European heritage can be found in the city's core, but exponential growth and visionary design is increasingly competing for dominance on the streetscape. Our diversity gives Toronto a unique advantage. And today, Toronto, well, not today because it's lockdown, but generally today, Toronto is booming. Till recently, there were more cranes in the air in Toronto than in all the cities in the USA combined. We have one of the fastest growing construction sectors, nestled inside one of the most livable cities in the earth. We are witnessing explosive growth in creative sectors, notably film production, music creation, and arts. You all know about the benefits of the arts. Individually and collectively as communities, people want to be where the action is: life, connection, the spark of creativity. And here in Toronto, we are seeing this attraction pulling developers and tenants alike into new and exciting creative hubs across the city. Sorry, just 1 second. Post-pandemic, this is going to become increasingly important as creating and fostering connections will add value to spaces and to our lives. Next slide, please. In the 90s, a dearth of affordable space for artists led Toronto Arts Council to an Incubate Artscape, now a world leader in creative placemaking. Lobbying efforts from the arts community provided a platform for newly elected Mayor Barbara Hall to champion live workspace and to rezone underdeveloped areas of inner Toronto. And as so often happens, what's good for artists is good for society, and particularly for developers. 900 Queen Street West was Artscape's first affordable arts housing project and the first officially zoned artist live work project in Toronto. You know, it's really hard to imagine now, but in 1995, this area was dotted with derelict buildings and vacant storefronts. The advent of this building, modest as it was, with 22 live work studios, 5 work studios, and 1 gallery, spurred redevelopment of loft-style condos, art-infused hotels, trendy restaurants, and an ever-increasing influx of galleries. The area, called Queen Street West, is now home to thousands and thousands of condo dwellers, offices housing creative industries, and is now one of the most sought after neighborhoods in Toronto. You know, I worked in this area in the 90s and saw the transformation right in front of my eyes. It was fast. 1 week, there was hardly a place to buy a cup of coffee. And a few years later, the streets were overflowing with restaurants, bars, and young urban dwellers. And through this experience, the not-for-profit Artscape learned how to develop and market housing and workspace to become a major partner with commercial developers. Next slide, please. Oh gosh. Another example is the Historic Distillery District, designated National Historic Site, known as an outstanding example of Victorian industrial design. It was founded in 1832 by Guterman Warts, and it grew to become the largest distillery in the world and a large landowner in the East End of Toronto. So in the 80s, when I ran a music theater company just up the street, the distillery was shuttered except for the occasional film shoot. And it was extremely difficult to attract anyone down to come to this area, believe me. I tried to get people down there. The owners of the distillery, a pension fund, tried to attract tenants to what was considered to be a derelict collection of Victorian industrial buildings. Now, I was told that $86 million was spent trying to develop the site. 20 years ago, a small group of developers had an innovative and quite brave idea about the site. Their vision, now I'm going to quote here, was to combine the romance and relaxing atmosphere of European walking and patio districts with the hip, cool dynamic of an area like Soho, where creative minds get together and you feel as if anything can happen. That's from their website. Now, the decision to redevelop the site as an arts and cultural center was seen favorably by city planning. A partnership with Artscape was struck for 2 of the buildings, and this yielded both favorable conditions with tax and planning and a practically guaranteed tenancy from artists while the larger developments occurred. Next slide, please. The site opened in 2003, and indeed, again, my own career melded with this story of creative city development in the distillery district. I installed a rehearsal studio and offices for my then company at the time, Tapestry Opera, and we became one of the foundational tenets of this new initiative. You know, I was early in the experiment. There was mud streets, and again, a lack of a good coffee shop, but the site developed into one of the jewels for Torontonians and tourists alike of our city. Heady days indeed, the early days. Music festivals filled the courtyard in summer to attract people and tenants to the site. Now, well, normally, it's an incredibly bustling area filled with retail office spaces, restaurants, condos, exhibition spaces, and now bring out people in droves to walk around the cobblestone streets. One of Canada's most successful theatre companies, Soul Paper, built its home there. Arguably, this development opened up the eastern front of Toronto, which is now developing further and further east on industrial and port lands by the lakefront. Regeneration through the arts is likely very familiar to you. Artists have a unique ability to distinguish what might be from what is. Artists are first adapters, risk takers. They are the first to envision the life that is to come into an area. Next slide, please. So back to the trendy West End. 401 Richmond Street, developed by Margie Zeidler, is another great example of industrial space which has been reimagined as a creative hub, resulting in a new boom of energy in this particular Toronto neighborhood. 401 Richmond is now home to dozens of arts companies, galleries, publishers, and other not-for-profit organizations. Below market rents, and Margie's wonderful vision to keep this building affordable for artists has transformed this particular area forever. The prophet of placemaking, Richard Florida, first wrote what now seems blindingly obvious to us, that the clustering forces of young creatives and tech workers in metropolitan areas were leading to greater economic prosperity. He told mayors to make their cities a place where hipsters want to be, with a vibrant arts and music scene and a lively cafe culture. That resulting gentrification is making it tough for artists to survive is really a topic for another day. But fortunately for us in Toronto, our artists are contributing to a sense of inclusiveness and connectedness that helps ameliorate the economic divide that prosperity can bring. Next slide, please. So at Toronto Arts Council, we fund the majority of the city's arts organizations and thousands of individual artists each year. About a year into my role in 2006, I presented a new vision to the board, Creative City Block by Block, partly to bring the economically driven rhetoric of city building at the time down to the neighborhood level and back to the transformative role of the artists in society. You know, at this time, the downtown core was rich with cultural amenities. That was the time that new Opera House was being built by Diamond Schmidt. KPMB designed a state-of-the-art concert hall. Frank Gehry designed the expansion of the Art Gallery of Ontario, and Daniel Libeskind was creating an extension to the Royal Ontario Museum. However, outside the downtown core was another matter altogether in terms of art space, a cultural wasteland. So at the council, we started to focus our efforts on supporting more opportunities to enjoy the arts throughout the entire city. And our subsequent research has shown an increased sense of engagement, sense of community building, sense of pride, and with it, regeneration. We created an Arts in the Parks program, which connects neighborhoods all across the city with events. In 2019, we had 290 events across the city. Sometimes people who'd never experienced the arts went to these events. So we also see Arts in the Parks as an excellent opportunity to bring back a bit of joy to the citizens of Toronto as we emerge from this pandemic and this lockdown. Next slide, please. People will want to emerge from COVID-19 to connect, explore, and create more than ever before. You know, there is truly an exciting opportunity to imagine how we can better blend life and workplace. We now miss the connections of bumping into coworkers at the water cooler, casual exchange of ideas in the hallway. You know, right now, without these inorganic connections to connect, our interactions must be scheduled on Zoom, and technology intervenes. Developing workspaces as workplaces, as spaces to gather, to share and inspire, will give workers back the connections that they're going to been so desperately craving during this pandemic, and a reason to go to the office. But also once the arts enters an area of the city, it starts to spill out into the surrounding streets. This also gives a sense of place and destinations. The arts inside the office or out create a sense of place, a sense of pride, a splash of color, the generation of an emotion. Next slide, please. So murals are popping up more and more frequently in the city, with both private developers and city departments supporting these artistic expressions of pride and sense of place. This massive mural proclaims pride in the adjoining neighborhood, Toronto's Gay Village. Next slide, please. I happen to serve on the advisory committee for Toronto's Year of Public Art called Artworks TO. It's going to be starting in October of this year and will run through for an entire year to 2022. It's got a very, very large project. So this really indicates that our city government recognizes the role of art in creating a deeper sense of opportunity for creativity and connection in the public realm. Other City of Toronto programs like Big Art TO, Street Art TO, Show Love TO, are examples of city building initiatives that are positioning and embedding arts as part of the process of neighborhood and economic rejuvenation. So this slide is from a Wee installation at Nuit Blanche, which is also an astonishingly successful all-night art thing that brings 1 million people out into the streets annually, pre-COVID, of course. Next slide, please. This slide speaks for itself. This is the programming all over the city that's coming to the public realm as part of our Year of Public Art. I'm excited. Next slide, please. As I was writing this, I was thinking of some of my favorite moments in Toronto pre-pandemic, attending a music festival at Harbourfront by the lake as per the slide. Another is waiting in line. Yes, waiting in line. The line that circles several blocks outside screenings for the annual Toronto International Film Festival. These lineups, they turn this big city into a cultural village. You strike up conversations with people you've never met before, talk about films you want to see, you chat with acquaintances you only see once a year. It's a unique experience. These cultural gatherings, they create this sense of belonging, of ownership of your own city, of connectedness, and right now, of poignant nostalgia. So I'll leave it there for now. Thank you. You're on mute, Paul.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Claire. And a reminder of the extraordinary regenerative effect that arts communities, generally poor when they get going, the effect they have because they have to do things with buildings that nobody else wants to touch. I think that question about the tension then created as values go up. Developers, of course, want to go to places that are lively, and the people who've kind of opened up the area in the first place then come under sort of financial pressure. We see this very often in London, and if you want to know where the next value area is, you have to look for where the poor artists are trying to find the kind of contemporary version of the garret. I just had one question, Claire, which is with the amount of art that's obviously happening in Toronto with big sort of city policies to promote it, what about the development world itself? Is there much provision of art, whether outside buildings or inside buildings, as part of the development process? Has it affected the market in that way?
Yeah, we're one of my board members of the foundation is with Oxford Properties, and they just unveiled a massive piece of public art recently, and it's right downtown, right in the center of town, right next to their one of their properties, and it's a big conversation piece. As I said in my presentation, more and more developers are also welcoming, well, let's call them graffiti remediation projects or large murals. Developers are also paying into a program where the boards which front their construction streets are filled with arts. But there is a bigger conversation, and Year of Public Art is welcoming the corporate community into that conversation around public art. And we're renewing the whole tension between private developers and city-run public art departments. There's a whole new conversation, and Year of Public Art is really, Artwork Studio is really helping to ground that conversation into a new sense of partnership. And there are some wonderful developers who are working together around the lakefront to curate pieces that actually are in conversation with each other, which is a remarkable project. You know, they're not in competition, they're actually talking to each other. So I think, you know, I think it's actually an optimistic period for the art and development right now.
Thank you very much. This sounds great collaboration. We're going to move on to our next speaker, Alistair Moss. Now, Alistair, in one person, combines the public and private sector because he runs the real estate unit at Memory Crystal, who are City of London lawyers. But I would hesitate to say his spare time, but his public role, already mentioned in relation to the City Corporation's Planning Committee, means that he's a keen observer of every office development and any other sort of development which is taking place in arguably the world's biggest financial centre. Alistair, over to you.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Paul, and thank you to Robin, BCO, for inviting me to speak this afternoon. I suppose if we could start the slides, that would be great. just go to the next slide. I just want to set a bit of context as to where the city really lies. Next, please. Just for those of you on this who may not be so familiar with it, but you know, planning, which, as Paul said, is my part-time job, so to speak, is really a very, very structured kind of thing where there's lots of layers, and it's important to recognise that the City of London that I'm responsible for, it fits within national and regional guidance, and that's where the London plan comes in, which is set by the mayor, and that really, I applaud it really for the fact that it is talking about this good growth, inclusivity and sustainability in all the senses of the word. And the city is an important part of that growth story in what in London we call the CAZ, the Central Activity Zone. And the city is right in the middle of that and is entirely within the CAZ. There's no parts of it which are classed as anything else. And the city has a major advantage, I'd say, over other parts of London in that when we start coming back post-COVID, you know, it's probably the best connected part of London by way of public transport and other means. I'm sure we'll cover how transport is very much changing and has changed, but it remains by all methods and means very, very well connected. So the strategic context of where the city is in this kind of hierarchy of planning is that it's primarily a place for business, but a place for business with a lot to offer as well as business, because we firmly believe that business is far more than just about offices. It's about enhancing so much more. Next slide, please. So in terms of our local context, further down the hierarchy, we're setting our City Plan 2036, which is where we think the city is to go in the next few years. I think, you know, I've now had a political planning role now for goodness, around 15, 16 years or so. And I think, you know, it's a fair criticism of planning politicians that we often can't enunciate what our aims and objectives are. And I think actually over the last few years, we've got better at that. And there is far more of a public face on what local authorities are wanting. So our City Plan 2036 is going for things which I hope one would imagine are fairly obvious, but really need to be stated. The city continuing to be a leading financial, professional and business centre, indeed what we'd say is probably the premier place in the world or amongst them. Offering flexible and adaptable workspaces for the post-COVID world, having really high quality design and an interesting mix of the old and the new. And observers would have seen we've consented a huge amount of schemes recently, so there's a lot of new stuff coming up in the city. Making it, as with national policy in the London plan, safe, green and sustainable, and also increasingly inclusive. The city of the 1980s is not an image we really want to be associated with. We want the city to feel like a place that anyone can be in and that they feel part of. It is, after all, the economic powerhouse for London and the UK, and therefore needs to have that mandate and feel to it. So overall, the city plan is about making the city an attractive and distinctive place to visit and spend time. To visit and spend time for, I should emphasise, really any purpose. And it should be, in this post-COVID world, worth the journey to come here. We need to attract people into the city, both internationally, nationally, and within London. Next slide, please. So, offices of the future, what are they going to be? Clearly, the last year has been there's been a major debate upon this, and no doubt we'll be covering this further. But they need to be relevant, obviously, to new ways of living and working. And I think that COVID has sped up a lot of the pre-existing business trends and behavioural trends that we were seeing. And the question really for the city, and I think more widely, is how do we seize those opportunities offered by the good trends and reduce the risks which are posed by the bad trends? City has a long heritage of adapting to change as to who is in it, how it operates, who governs it, what its stance is on things. And I think the last year has been a big challenge and one of change, but we need to recognise our heritage that we have always been opportunist in the nicest sense of the word. Next slide, please. So are we going to be looking, question, at less density, about making the place attractive for people to be in and repurposing some space, certainly within the business arena? Will businesses think they need fewer staff in the office every day? But will the working conditions change for people to come to work, to be attracted to work, and improving those, both in terms of a well-being sense, but also in terms of the output? Now, I think that everyone will be thinking, why do I need to be where I am to do something? Do I need to be with people? Do I need to be in that specific location for whatever reason? Which is really good, and I think is excellent for productivity, but also means that space is more thought about than ever and isn't just about planners and developers and architects and others to be thinking about. Workspaces definitely are becoming collaboration hubs where people will meet face to face to stimulate creative work. Creativity was never a word used a few years ago, but now you just think it would just be in an ad agency. Now everyone believes there are creatives in most businesses, and the question is where that can be done best through non-remote means. And also, if there's less density, is there more space for collaboration space and more complementary uses to attract staff into work, a more demanding workforce and more accountability to the workforce, which I think is a great thing. Next slide, please. One aspect of this, and here you'll see Bloomberg's fantastic building, is about active movement. And part of this, it seems a small point, but is about staircases and not lifts. Things have really changed from the days you go into an office and you expect a long hallway, lifts prominently there like an altar in a cathedral, where people will go up and down of them, wait dutifully. Now, actually, most developers are putting stairs to the fore as the means of communicating, and indeed stairs in between floors, which make all the difference. All the health benefits of this, chance meetings, better collaboration, and a more active working style, which is what people are looking for. And we all know, having been locked at home for the last year or so, that we are very aware, I think most people are very aware of how much they move about and needing to do that. Next slide, please. Also allied to this concept of natural ventilation of fresh air. Now, I think this is beyond just at the moment that people curse most buildings, like the one I'm in at the moment, where there are very, very few openable doors and windows. We know that fresh air can reduce air conditioning needs. Air conditioning and the use of power like that is becoming increasingly unacceptable. We were leading, certainly in London, I'm sure it's the case in Toronto and other cities, to becoming hotter cities, unsustainably hot potentially. So therefore, there's been a massive effort to make cities' air cleaner, and certainly City of London's got its own climate action strategy, and its clean air work has been ongoing for at least the last decade or so, pioneering on that. You know, why people are quite rightly concerned about what they breathe, but equally we've kind of realised, to state the obvious, that probably the environment, if it's controlled in the right way through architecture and systems, doesn't need to be so artificial as having the conventional methods. And we're using more and more passive heating and cooling, as I say, and getting towards our aim for a net zero carbon future. And indeed, these are usually the questions about carbon that have come up at every planning committee. It's now a mainstream political thought, I think, and developers don't even need prompting on this to put in sustainable buildings. And the other kind of thing is that people quite like a degree of control over their own working environment, and the concept of having a one-size-fits-all doesn't really suit them. And we quite like the ability to open windows and have that control. Another reason to come in. Next slide, please. Allied to this is this liberalisation, I would say, of private space that we've had, of these breakout spaces, many of which are now public in the city. Green space to address climate change, reduce flood risk, biodiversity, and basically provide outdoor space for people. And the green roofs themselves and terraces are offering this informal meeting and leisure space and also some fantastic views across London. There's something, I don't know what other people feel, but there's something really uplifting, literally, about being up high and being able to see things in perspective. There's something psychologically positive, I believe, about that, as long as the space is welcoming. And we've realized in the city with vertical walls and these roof gardens that we can actually create meadowlands in effect in the city, where before it was just considered not even on the agenda. Next slide, please. Well, thank goodness we've realized that actually the well-being of us as human beings is probably paramount, and therefore that from a working perspective, that well-being in its widest sense is very important. And, you know, healthier workers, we're all happier and more productive, better retention and better attraction of staff. And indeed, these seem to be, certainly our analysis of businesses in the city, is that key things about retention and recruitment are increasingly less about remuneration and more about working conditions, ethos, culture, and policies such as these. Next slide, please. I alluded earlier to the fact that transport's really changed, and I think that, you know, the COVID has definitely accelerated this, a determination for a non-car bound recovery. Now, again, when we go into buildings and buildings that are now coming out, the cycling idea of people not having a way to park their bike or being sent round some back stair route or something like that is now well over. So now, certainly in the last year or so, most of the schemes I'm seeing either approve or pre-application stage have shared entrance where people are going to come in the main entrance with their bike, bluntly, and that will be celebrated as part of that journey in. And cycle commuting obviously is a feasible thing for a lot of, certainly of London dwellers who are using it as an alternative, certainly to the car, but also to bus and tube and things. The public realm in the city, but also across London, has really adapted over the last year or so to increase that road capacity for cyclists and pedestrians as well, and also to make it safer. And so this storage and the proper facilities for cyclists, including those on short stay, is an expected part of the office offer. Next slide, please. Just generally, and this is a picture of a recently consented scheme on Holborn Viaduct, where, you know, we're seeing, and talking about these meadowlands and things, green measures, not just greenwashing, but properly embedded, that, you know, is pretty well the building to improve the appearance and biodiversity, operational performance, and also the carbon footprint of everything that's coming out of the ground now and what it's replacing. And as I said, the green walls and roofs are now a common sight in the city, although I think this building is probably the most green by way of space that it's probably possible to be. Other than if it had no windows, it would be possible for it to have more greening. But given the fact it needs windows, it has got, I think, green everywhere, including on the roof. Also, we're looking at different materials. Clearly, there are debates which you, Paul, and others know far more about than I, about use of concrete and wood, etc. But also looking at, you know, where the embedded carbon is of new buildings and you know, what the whole life cycle is on those. But overall, the picture is increasingly green and sustainable places and buildings. And I think from a political perspective, I've seen a shift in where sustainability was talked about 15 or so years ago, and there was a lot of technology things coming into it, but now it's really gone up a gear, and it's something that people are understanding and is more radical. Next slide, please. The city, we have got the advantage. I think that you know, we've got such heritage to the place. You know, it is no bland business centre. I'm not saying actually that any business centre is usually bland, but it just adds that bit of human kind of historical quirkiness to it. But heritage, we like our heritage, I think, as people, sense of identity, etc. And with all the iconic sites that we have within the city, you know, it just adds to the kind of sense of place. And I think how the office functions as well kind of links to that. People, nothing's kind of in isolation. We've got a load of protection, of course, of this with many listed buildings, etc., to it, which can constrain what we do. But equally, a lot of city is cheek by jowl of heritage and modern, large versus small, etc. And some of that juxtaposition really works well in my view. And that also brings people into the city as a place that they want to be because it has character to it that perhaps other places may not be as apparent, or it's just simply different. It isn't just an urban environment which is bland. Next slide, please. And the final bit, and this is where I think Claire's presentation was very strong on this, but we would like to think in the City of London we are as an increasing part of the offer. We've always been major art sponsors, particularly through the Barbican, but increasingly people want to come to a city where they're not coming in through a station, grabbing a cup of coffee, going to their office, then going back and doing the same thing in reverse. That people are wanting to do other things, and lo and behold, may even come in at the weekends. And the reason why they might want to come in from a suburban location is that they want to socialize, or that they want to experience something culturally. And we all know, Claire, you're the expert, but we all know what it does for us, what art and culture does for us. And it adds to the interest that the city brings to it. Our Culture Mile, which we've really been majoring on, we've got a new we're going to refurbish the Barbican Arts Centre, and the new Museum of London site in Smithfield is really going to change that part of town. We've got a whole range of arts and institutions, and we're not afraid to use the public space, sculpture in the city, lots of fairs, meeting venues, pageantry, spectacle, stuff like that, that we think make the City of London a vibrant and distinctive place to spend time and to attract people in. So next and final slide, please. I mean, in summary, we're confident of the future of the city. We are having to reimagine it, and we're thinking that part of this rebranding is about this new sense of space that it brings. And it also, to pick up on the title of this thing, it does also give a sense of identity very much. It's a question of how we accentuate and celebrate that, and bluntly get everyone back here as quickly as we can to continue to be an economic heart for the UK. Thank you.
Alistair, thank you for a very comprehensive look round many of the issues that are affecting the office market as a whole. And in relation to the city, what an extraordinary story, the greening of the City of London. And I suppose that the emergence of the roof garden as something which is not once in a blue moon, but we're starting to see it become a sort of regular feature of planning applications, is a sort of extraordinary transformation. The other thing I was thinking about, actually, in relation to what Claire was saying, actually this business about the interface between public and private, and between, let's say, non-office worker users of an office building. I'm thinking of those office buildings where it's possible, free of charge, to go up to their rooftop gardens or viewing rooms, giving the office a quite different sense of its sort of place in the city, because it's not a fortress for workers only. And I wonder, so just one question for you, Alistair, is this something that is sort of happening almost by accident, serendipitously, or is it something that needs a serious push in terms of planning policy and broader policies about the future of the city?
Well, I think it's embedded in our policy, to answer your question. You know, we are, I think it started off by the fact that people were going, building tall buildings, and there was something about the public nature of space, of airspace. So if you were going to take, so to speak, views and airspace, you had to give back. But we've now moved, I think, to a realm where actually private space does demand some public space, and that there's an accountability as to how we use space, whether it be public or private. But the great thing about this is it dovetails with, I think, I hope Roger would agree, with what works commercially. You know, if you want space, I mean, I do accept there are some uses where, like we've just consented new court space, it wouldn't be acceptable for the public to be able to wander anywhere in a high security court. However, most places like Bloomberg, for example, you want people to be everywhere and feeling part of it. So you can walk into buildings where you're not sure whether it is actually public or private space. And British Land are a great example of that, you know, around Liverpool Street, where, you know, there are some space, and you can, and that increases the footfall. You can do more uses in it. It's a space which people identify with. It gets more on Instagram. It's got a higher profile, et cetera, et cetera. So everyone wins from making space more public.
Thank you very much. Well, that takes us rather neatly onto our third speaker, Roger Madlin, who it's been sort of given to Roger, or he sees the opportunity to have that most wonderful thing, which is a second chance. Now, this is not a second chance because you got it wrong first time round. It's a second chance because it was brilliant first time round. Now, first time round for Roger in London was the area around King's Cross. Extraordinarily successful mixed-use complex, of course, based on one of the busiest rail stations in London and a huge transport interchange. But actually, some of the things that have already been said about the contribution of non-commercial activities in helping to bring commercial development about, in the case of King's Cross, the move of the University of the Arts to a significant building at the outset of the project, is a wonderful example of that sort of mingling of public and private organizations in a very creative master plan. Now, Roger's sort of repeating the exercise in a very different context. Canada Water, for those of you who don't know London, or actually if you know London but you've never been to Canada Water, is actually incredibly central. It's between the City of London and Docklands, but until recently, it was known by a lot of people because 1 million people a year went shopping there to a big shopping centre. But it was a bit of a hidden jewel. It also has heritage, and we can see emerging under Roger's sort of patronage almost, another extraordinary success story, quite different in character to King's Cross, very much its own character, but nevertheless with some of the same building blocks. Roger, over to you.
Thank you, Paul, for that brilliant introduction. Not 1 million visitors to Canada Water Shopping Centre at the moment, Paul, 7 million per year, which is just extraordinary. But you know, that's the intensity of that part of London. I am very, very lucky indeed, Paul, and Alistair, you know, has covered lots of the acceleration of trends, and Claire's talked about making cities much more livable and exciting and stimulating through art. So everything I was going to say in a professional way has been said much better. One of the great things about having you as a chairman, Paul, as you say, yeah, don't bother to prepare and we won't rehearse together because and that spontaneity is great. So I'm just going to make it up as we go along. I'm going to talk about why I actually feel almost every morning like a spring chicken, and you've kind of given the clue. You know, I am clearly not a spring chicken, and after about 4 decades in development, trying to learn and pick up themes over all of that time, and trying to incorporate some of those themes into my next opportunity has been something I have been extraordinarily lucky. And you know, whether Canada Water's the second big go, or the third, or the fourth, or the fifth, I don't know, because obviously before King's Cross, Argent did Brindley Place in Birmingham, which was a huge learning curve for King's Cross. You know, how could you develop a place that was slightly in people's minds off pitch. In King's Cross, despite the transport accessibility making it absolutely bang in the heart of central London, it wasn't in people's minds, and it wasn't in the way that London had evolved, missing it out, so to speak. So Brindley Place taught us a lot about how to deliver a phased development that was economically viable in phases that each phase might be the last, because you might run out of money, or it might not work quite as well as you hoped. And King's Cross being 5 times as big as Brindley Place, I think without Brindley Place we wouldn't have won King's Cross. I don't think we would have had the credibility, and I think we wouldn't have had that huge learning curve. And of course, around Brindley Place also Thames Valley Park and Green Park, which was very informative for King's Cross, and even more so for Canada Water. And I'm going to name drop, but when I met Bill Gates in 1987 in a pub in Enfield, he had taken 40,000 square feet in a development I was involved with in Basingstoke, and he was talking about how he was going to go for the mass market and grow and grow and grow. And it wasn't a particular surprise when he bought land at Thames Valley Park, because he didn't know whether he wanted 100,000 or 200 or 300 or 400 or 500 or 600,000. Oracle did the same at Thames Valley Park, and Oracle, then Cisco did the same at Green Park. And there's a reason for telling you this in a second. So these kind of relatively new companies in the scheme of things chose locations where they could grow in what they hoped was quite a dramatic way, but they weren't quite sure how fast they would grow, and they wanted some control of the environment. Now, I think many businesses like me started to feel that business parks, some of them had nice environments around, some of them had very nice buildings, but they kind of made you want to give up the will to live, because other than you're in your car or in your building, and there was nothing about what we were really starting to enjoy, certainly as the 90s in London and other cities in London. That life from cities that I'm sure most of us want for a lot of times. That intensity. Some of you might remember Peter Rees at a BCO saying, the reason London's so successful is it's the biggest free sex, place in the world. What he was obviously getting at was, young people like to go where young people are. The more young people there are, the more young people that are attracted there. And whilst not all of them are going to be PhD students and entrepreneurs, if you've got that huge kind of wealth of talent wanting to go to a place, any business that's optimistic and wants to expand is going to want to be in that location. So moving back into cities like Google, why did they come to King's Cross? We might pretend it's because King's Cross was super cool, and we had St Martin's, we had a meeting in a bus, old double-decker bus, we had a floating boat. They went there because they didn't know whether they wanted 1 million square feet or 1.5 million square feet or 2 million square feet. There was nowhere else in London they could do that. And of course, if we look at some of the things coming out of the pandemic about reduction of office space, all I can say is I have never been more excited about new businesses and business growth in sectors usually to do with data and the way we can now analyze data. And most of the big office take-up in London over the last few decades has been from companies that didn't exist 20, 25 years ago. Look at King's Cross. We started that in 2000. Google, we were in a garage in 1998. Yahoo were bigger than Google. Facebook didn't exist. LinkedIn didn't exist. Netflix didn't exist. All of those businesses. I am pretty convinced that most of the take-up in London in the next 10 years will be from companies. Some of them will exist, but they're not really household names. And any other business that is optimistic. Some businesses will be smaller, but flight to quality, better property fundamentals, better buildings as Alistair was talking about, and Stuart Lipton's, 22 Bishopsgate, what a great building. He wanted to, bring the business park environment into central London, and he's did Chiswick Park, but he hasn't done that. So if we go to the first slide, King's Cross to me had all the advantages of next one, please. Had all the fundamentals of people being able to get there, that talent, had enough critical mass to create all of the great things that we want in cities that Claire was talking about and Alistair was talking about. We created the intensity there, but I guess before I was introduced to Canada Water, if someone said to me, what would you have liked more at King's Cross, or what would you have liked to be able to do differently? And the answer would be, I would have liked some more space. I would have liked some parks. The green space, the public space there is good, but I would have liked it to be bigger. And then suddenly, at the end of 2015, British Land, I did have an aspiration. I've still got one to build a new town from scratch. 50,000 people, probably never going to be able to do that. We've looked at various things overseas, Paul, haven't we, for various people, but when British Land said, do you want to come and build a new town, I thought they were going to say Cambridge or Oxford or something like that. And he said Canada Water, and I'm like, oh really? Like, how much land have you got? 50 acres, really? Anyway, I went down. Here it is, Canada Water. You can see where it is in relation to the City of London. It's 20 minutes walk. But look to the left of that slide. It's a 64-acre park. That was the first park built in London, by a public authority, for the health and well-being of the residents of Southwark. Funny that, isn't it? And look to the right, that's some of Russia Dock Woodlands, 45 odd acres, and then you've got just at the bottom of the picture, Greenland Dock. There's 120 acres of recreational space, breathing space, woodland attached to the 53 acres. If you haven't been to Canada Water, come over and have a look, because I was almost convinced I was going to say no. And if you move to the next slide, from the British Land kindly offering, but I was just completely gobsmacked. If you just go back, there you are. That's where you are. And if you look behind you, Canary Wharf, as Paul said, is the same distance out towards Denmark. Next one, please. No, actually going backwards. So there's the master plan. What is it? Well, it could be 3 million square feet of workspace. The land we don't own immediately adjacent could be another 1 million or 1.5 million square foot of workspace. So we've really got the opportunity to create a significant cluster of workspace to create that urban intensity that will feed the bars and the restaurants, will feed the cultural, will feed the retail. So we can create a new town centre from scratch, and I don't think anyone's had that opportunity in London. They've all evolved, and King's Cross is a fantastic, fundamentally a business hub, with some residential and a limited amount of retail and leisure. Very good it is too. We could do 4,000 homes there, and we could do 1 million square feet of retail and leisure. So we can get the intensity, and we've got the transport links, 11 minutes to Green Park. We are the best located place in central London for access on public transport in 45 minutes for the under 35. Why is that important? Because if you're an expanding business, most of your employees are going to be under 35 years old. And it's not only public transport in 45 minutes, they'll be able to get on their bikes and get here in 45 minutes as well. So if you don't have to go in every day, being able to get somewhere easily has got to be one of the things that says, I will go in today. Actually, I've only got an hour. I want to collaborate with people, but I can go to that bar, or I can go and see that art exhibition, or social connections with all that intensity around it. Or one of the other things I believe is a theme that we've known about, but is becoming more and more important, is the kind of social connections to the wider communities and the ability to feel much more fulfilled and worthwhile, than just working for your employer or your immediate social network. So being able to volunteer in care homes or in schools, or playing sport with other people, or going for walks, or sharing art experience or cultural experience. And British Land, creating this campus, we've got obviously Broadgate and Euston and Paddington at the moment, being able to manage a wide area, we're not going to email every individual who lives there, works there, or visits there. But if people want, we can help facilitate all of that social connection and all of that volunteering, which I believe has become increasingly important to a lot of us. To feel much more fulfilled, other than just going to a place of work. Next one, please. So you said to me, Paul, a while ago, did I know this pandemic was about to happen? Because Canada Water's kind of been themed on health and well-being, physical health and well-being, being able to walk into green spaces and along a dock, whether you want to run or some people are lucky enough, they can and want to run, but hopefully most of us can walk or be pushed or taken on a trike, like some of the elderly people we take round. But being able to connect into this green space, into this fresh air. We've all been talking about it for some years, whether it's air pollution, whether it's exercise, whether it's being in a green environment. There is a lot of work that a lot of people on this seminar will know more than me about the benefits of that. Next one, please. And here are some of the spaces that are literally connected to our 53 acres. And as I said, Southwark Park, I think it 1864, first municipal park in London. Genuinely, it was built to improve the health and well-being of the workers that wasn't great at that time. And if you think about why would a local authority want to do that? Well, it's kind of driven by economics, isn't it? You don't want your workers to die, and you want your workers to be as productive as possible. And productivity, in Britain, for whatever reason, we haven't quite grasped it, but getting more productivity out of people probably isn't by locking them in an office for more often, or morale will improve when the beatings stop. It must be about giving people more space, more time to be more efficient when they're actually sat down at their desk or in a meeting. And we've had this plan. I had this plan right the way through King's Cross, and even before that. But we're definitely going to do it at Canada Water. The Wednesday afternoon bell, where we're going to say, right, it's 3 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon. Ding, ding, ding. You don't all have to put your sports kit on and come out and play football or rugby or netball or whatever. But we will offer a whole menu of opportunities, whether it's a time bank or whether it's volunteering in the schools or whether it's helping with a cooking club or volunteering in the old person. And that takes a lot of management. It also takes a lot of checks and security checks and stuff like that. But we think increasingly that kind of mental aspect of health and well-being is more important. Next one, please. You can see Canary Wharf there in the background. Now, I haven't got many pictures of the buildings. We've got 40 odd new buildings. Some of the new office buildings, I think, do deal very much with some of the themes of COVID. Most of them are 6 stories. Most of them have larger floor plates. Most of them have opening windows, lots of fresh air coming in, plenty of stairs to get up and down. So I think from that aspect, we will be very well positioned. That's where we were going anyway. In terms of embodied carbon, we will be building these buildings, using the latest, low cement concrete. We're trying to use timber as much as we can, but that's proving very difficult, as I'm sure lots of people in the UK know, with insurance issues. But what we also want to do, even more so than King's Cross, you've heard this expression in Italy, fare una passeggiata, just wandering, because it's a wonderful thing to do. And I'm sure we've got examples of towns and cities, certainly mine in the 80s and 90s growing up, tended to be in Europe, and then suddenly Birmingham did that amazing pedestrianisation programme in the late 80s, early 90s. But some of the examples in Europe I've been to, they weren't great places to work. They didn't have that intensity. And I thought for some time, wouldn't it be wonderful to get that intensity of the city of London, of the most dense parts of London, but have the wonder of being able to, just wander through and into green spaces. And that's what we're trying to do at Canada Water. We've got this extraordinary dock, and we are trying to design buildings that you can carry on the route, and it's not a roof garden, it's a garden all the way up to the roof. Paul, next one please. Next one please. And culture, we kind of stumbled. We have this amazing old Printworks building, and it's become in the top 10 of cultural venues in the world for all kinds of music. It's not just electronic dance music. It's had over 500,000 paying visitors there. It's had 750,000 unique social media users, and we're trying very hard to incorporate that with a slightly more varied use into the scheme. Why would you want to get rid of an extraordinary cultural venue like that? Next one, please. And here are some designs coming forward, and obviously keeping existing structures is the best way to reduce embodied carbon. So we're trying to do that wherever we can, right the way across British land, actually. Next one, please. And the park, just to give you some sense of scale, that park, we've got squares and green spaces and green routes, but that's 3 times bigger than the one at King's Cross. So you said, lucky again, what would I do differently at King's Cross? I'd make the park 3 times bigger, and here it is. Next one, please. And you mentioned Central St Martin's at King's Cross, higher education, the right kind of higher education, the kinds of people that want to work with the communities and the businesses around, which most of them do now. Increasingly important, I think, for a business cluster, for an urban centre. What's the most important thing the world needs at the moment? It needs applied engineers to help solve all of the challenges, not just with the environment, but we need more and more and more applied engineers. So we have managed to secure an applied engineering university at Canada Water. They're moving in 3 months' time. We signed up with them just before we got planning, and we're building these modules for them, which will enable them to grow over the next 3 to 5 years while we build out permanent space. And I think there's lots of opportunities to kind of accommodate businesses, and while they grow, we can build permanent spaces. So come down and have a look at this. These modular buildings, you go inside them, they are better than the vast majority of workspaces, and very flexible. And you'll see like Alistair, a lot of the green space, and we've got local communities there working with all the businesses there, the skip garden people from King's Cross. So I've learned a lot over the decades. I think Canada Water will be very successful for very optimistic businesses from right the way across existing sectors and new sectors that we haven't even heard of. And I feel hugely lucky, Paul, to have been given this opportunity again, and it's just fantastic working with a bunch of bright, challenging people in British land, who are pushing and pulling, and all of these things are team efforts. And I've been very lucky over the years to have great small groups of people around me who contribute and argue and push. And that's the way to get great things. But all the things, that's it. It's me, I think. Next one, finished.
Roger, thank you very much for that. Wonderful tour d'horizon of your current work in progress. And I've only got one question. Actually, it was from an audience question. And they want to know whether you'll be moving into Canada Water actually to live at some point.
Well, one of the big themes is not a surprise for anyone, is the ageing population, and you and I, Paul, are in that bulge, and we have designed a kind of elderly village for an urban environment. There's lots of examples in Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan, America, Canada as well. The UK hasn't grasped that yet. Planning challenges and social care funding, elderly financial challenges, but we have designed something that might just appeal to you and me, Paul. So there's nothing like self-interest, is there? So
very good. It was an impertinent question anyway, but I thought it was a fun one. I'm going to invite each of the panelists to perhaps say something, talk about very briefly something that surprised them or that they liked, that they heard or saw from the other presentations. Claire, can I start with you? I mean, there were quite a bit of art activity in Roger's presentation. Any comments on what you've seen from two British property guys?
Well, I can't wait to go back to London. That's one thing. And I'm desperate to go to Canada Water. I think that the interaction between green space, cultural space, walking and close to transportation is seems like amazing, actually, to me, being in Toronto, that London could support such a huge experiment. I mean, it's really inspiring. And I was also really inspired by what Alistair had to say, particularly around the greening of London. I took a picture, I'll post it on Instagram, of the building with the crisscross with all the green wall. I do think we have a lot to learn from each other. I mean, cities have so much to learn from each other. And of course, I know London is a world center for culture. And it is inspiring to see how it is embedded in different environments, not simply within the cultural institutions, but is finding its way into where people work and play. So that was really quite inspiring to me, and I'm really happy to be on this panel. I've learned a lot, so thank you.
Thank you. Alistair, anything you've seen or heard you'd like to comment on?
Yeah, I mean, I was particularly taken when Claire said about artists being risk takers. And I thought, to what extent are we being risk takers as planners or developers or other people in property? You know, property's instinctively collaborative and it's all about creating things. No one gets anywhere without creating stuff in real estate. So, you know, how much are we risk takers? And I think that, you know, we have upped a gear on a lot of this, and I think we can thank the arts community bluntly for a lot of that, because as you said, Paul, often where there's stuff just kind of emerging that becomes, and then looking, Roger, what you're kind of, those spaces there, I think I was invited to an event there, and I'm very sorry I didn't come actually now, because you kind of think, in the old days, can you imagine keeping a space like that as a developer? You're thinking, this just looks wrong, and, you know, kind of shouldn't be, you know, it's shabby, it's not the right, but this is exactly what people want. So, you know, I like the fact that we're risk taking, we're more experimental, we're not prepared, you know, we're prepared to make mistakes and stuff, because it's all with the right kind of sentiment. And I also think what you say, Claire, about this greater economic prosperity being linked with arts and culture is definitely the case. And I don't mean that in the sense of rich people can go to the opera, and therefore, you know, entrepreneurs will come across the world to come to certain places, and therefore that is where kind of, you know, kind of there's more prosperity. You know, it is this inclusion point, which I think is important, which art has always been something about inclusion. It's always managed to say things, you can say things, as we know, in art, poetry, etc., which you wouldn't necessarily be otherwise able to say. And I think that's the really, really refreshing thing about it. And I think, Roger, the main thing I took away from what you said there, other than the fact, you know, it's hugely impressive, and I think, you know, very much aligned to your thinking. I'm delighted that we managed to work with developers like British Land and others who are, and Claire, you mentioned Oxford Properties and others. You know, there's some people really get this across the development community. You saying, Roger, about people needing more space and more time for things to work well and at their best, and the fact that we work best collectively when we are happiest and most enabled and most empowered. And, you know, that is such a change during my working lifetime for that to be the case. And I think probably, talking about generations being ageist, those below us, so to speak, actually demand that of us now. And it's naturally within their DNA. And I think that's brilliant. I think it's brilliant to be accountable. I think it's brilliant to be transparent about things. It's, you know, all those things. And that means that you create space in this context, bringing it back, that is best for those people and where humans thrive most.
Thank you very much. Actually, if I can sort of move on from that, I'm going to ask you another question, if I may, Roger, which is that, you know, master planning at worst are just quick site layouts with no real attention to long-term sustainability or inclusion or anything else. I wonder if you could just give us a little insight into, with experience of having done it before, what were the key factors in your brief to your master planning team? I mean, I know you work very closely with them, but how did you get the thinking done? Was this itself a sort of slow burn thing, or did you have very clear ideas from the outset that you could present to the sort of design teams?
Well, if I took you through the process of getting to the master plan at King's Cross that is being built today, I could show you 27 different master plans that each one of them we thought, well, that's quite good. And then you go through a process of what happens if you want to do this or do that, or, you know, then, you know, the planners come in and, you know, in the best sense, they go, you can't do that. Have you thought about this? You know, they're collaborative, they're constructively critical, and Camden and Southwark, luckily, you know, they've been constructively critical, and they've had their own ideas. If I took you through the process at Canada Water, there are 27 master plans. So I don't think there's a magic, you know, you have to do 26 wrong and then the 27th right. And I think some of those earlier ones at King's Cross and some of the earlier ones at Canada Water, you know, probably could have been built, and some of them people would have said, you know, they create good pieces of city, but they didn't quite pass the tests that the little team of people, you know, it's not just I assembled, you know, the process, you know, you got planners from Southwark, you've got planners from the GLA, you've got, you know, all of the consultant team, you know, not one of us, you know, kind of comes up and says, there you go, that's the right answer. You know, from my point of view, you know, having been a builder a long time ago, you know, I know how difficult it is, you know, to start building. You know, in the early days, I used to get architectural plans with no north point on, and, you know, the building didn't fit on the site and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, I always say to myself, right, if I want to build this building, you know, how much infrastructure do I have to put in? How easy is it to put that in? So I come at it from a very phased, you know, point of view. Can we just do this phase, or can we just do that phase, and what kind of spaces can you get around it? If then the money stops, you know, is it a good place? So I'm not, you know, some, you know, genius visionary. I'm just a pragmatic old builder that, you know, looks at a master plan, and so yeah, sometimes, you know, Allies and Morrison and Porphyrius came up with great stuff at King's Cross. And, yeah, you just go like, you got the 400 million pounds of infrastructure to put in for that first building then. Probably won't do that then, will we? You know, so there's a lot of pushing and pulling, and yeah, it's the team, Paul. It's the team, and like it.
Very good.
We like each other, yeah. I guess you don't have to like each other, but, you know, we all like each other. You know, we all criticise each other. We all take the piss out of each other, but I guess we all bring something. We're all professionals, and we're all relaxed about telling someone that they're an arse, or that's a stupid idea, or it won't work. You know, that's the same in any business, isn't it?
I think that's a kind of nice note to start drawing to a close. I'm going to make an observation, then I'm going to hand over to Robin to sort of beat us out, if that's the right phrase. And I suppose the observation is about the difference between what's happening now in the wake of the pandemic and what was happening certainly in London, but in other cities around the world in the 19th century, who were faced with extreme medical circumstances. I mean, the history of London, the embanking of the Thames, the introduction of modern sewerage came as a response to cholera. And at that time, the medical analysis, actually data analysis, was what proved was carrying the cholera, that it was water, that it wasn't in the air. And it was doctors, it was medical scientists who actually realized what the problem was. And in a very broad sense, the answer to it was infrastructure. It was an engineering solution to a disease problem. Now, I was talking the other day to Professor Alan Penn, who's advising the British government on the sort of design implications of post-pandemic development. And he made a most interesting observation. Because the virus, because COVID-19 is airborne, what this means is that the solutions to it are not going to be infrastructural. They are going to be about our built environment. Yes, it will involve engineering because, you know, the M&E engineers or the environmental engineers are going to have to deal with questions of airflow. How do you get more fresh air in? How do you do that without losing your insulation values and so on? So there are certainly engineering challenges, but they are within the context of a problem which is about air and therefore about volume. And that is why the significance of the built environment and the design professionals is going to be different this time round to what it was in the 19th century, because it is going to be about the buildings. And I think that what we've seen, the buildings and therefore the areas, if they're the solids, then the voids, which is the rest of the city, where actually we're not going to have to worry too much, because in the open air, you have greater protection than you do in enclosed spaces. So I think the presentations this afternoon have been very interesting because they've dealt both with what's going to happen to internal conditions for our workspace, but also how that's going to relate to the real life of the city, which is, as Claire's photographs admirably showed, the real life of the city is, of course, in the city. That's to say, in the spaces between the buildings, where we spend a huge amount of time, and the sort of cliche about street life, that really is where it's at. In combination with the places where we're still going to be working, this means big challenges and big opportunities for our sector. And I don't think it's an accident that the last 10 months have seen consecutive growth in the construction sector in the UK. Despite lockdowns, despite everything, we're still building and we're still growing. And let's just hope that what we're going to be building and growing, and as Alistair showed, almost literally growing buildings with green stuff, that it's going to be effective this time round as that 19th century infrastructure was in tackling the disease problems of their times. So thank you very much, speakers. And for a final word, Robin, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Paul, Claire, Alistair, Roger, thank you for giving us such a fascinating and interesting debate on the environs of the office and how they'll affect the future office occupation. To me, it will become one of the most important factors when occupiers are choosing where they want to set up their offices. What do the surroundings have to offer their staff? And their staff will probably dictate to them where they want to be. Paul, may I personally thank you for moderating the session so well. And I'd like to also thank our gold sponsors again, BDP Quadrangle, Gleeds, Lutron, Skanska, Troop Bywaters and Anders, Hare and WSP, plus our silver sponsors, Darling Associates, Architects, Hawley, HDR, Holy Palmer Flat, Overbury, UNI, and Wembley Park for their continued support. So we're now at the conclusion of the trilogy of webinars of the Office Reimagined. We've seen what the developers have had to say, what the occupiers want, and how the offices should blend into great spaces. I'd like to thank all the speakers, moderators, BCO technical personnel for putting together such a fascinating series. It's been a joy to work with everybody. May I wish you all well, and again, thank this panel for giving us their insight as to where the office environments are heading and how important they will be for the future occupiers and their decision makers. I'm Robin Brodie Cooper, your BCO president, wishing you all the best for the future as we slowly return to our offices and get back to work. Thank you and have a great day, and enjoy the up and coming bank holiday for those in the UK. And Claire, it's been a pleasure having you in Toronto, and you have a great rest of the day. It's morning time for you, so you've got a few more hours to go. We'll be clocking off in the next couple of hours. So thank you all. It's been a pleasure, and I really, really enjoyed listening to you all. Thank you.